Hi, hey Christian. It's Jesmyn
Hey,
Ward
hey,
here, and I'm
buddy.
here with Christian Kiefer. Am I pronouncing your last name correctly?
Yeah, yeah.
You said it out
For
loud.
you, I'd just be like, you can say whatever you want now. Oh
Yeah,
man,
we're here to talk about Phantoms, which was my book club pick.
I can't
For this,
even believe that you picked my book. I'm so
I
honored.
I I love it, and I was just like reading through the comments that the readers like posted on the app, and like the feedback is overwhelmingly positive.
Oh my
And sometimes
gosh.
there's some months where it's not so overwhelmingly positive, but like
Yeah.
people they really love this book. I mean, a lot of them spoke about the beauty of the language and of the prose, and about how sympathetic and the characters were. How they like really felt for the characters. So yeah, like overwhelmingly positive response to this
You
book,
have
which
a
I'm happy
you
about.
have a bunch of very kind people in your book club. That's what that's about.
No, they have good taste. They have good taste.
Oh
Uh,
man.
I'm gonna do something a little different, I guess, because so um I guess full disclosure for the book club members of my book club. Christian and I know each other. We are friends. We've become you know, good friends especially over the course of the pandemic. And I admire Christian so much as a writer that it's really hard for me to talk about Phantoms and not like
Oh,
geek out as a writer and ask you all these really like technical questions.
gonna make
So
me cry is what you're gonna do.
no.
I'm like,
So like so I have a couple questions for you that hopefully won't make it, that are more general. I think that readers will appreciate them. And then I'm going to go to you're going to have to give me a short minute because I need to go on my phone and look at the questions that the readers submitted, which were really
hmm.
good. Um and I want to ask you those before I get into asking you like my nerd, writing questions that no one will probably find interesting but me and
Yeah,
you.
you
Uh,
you and me. Yeah.
right. So yeah, so that's what I would do. I'll do. I'll ask you, like my little general questions, and then the readers' questions, and then we'll move on to the nerd questions. Um,
It's like the
so
three-layer cake of
right,
questions.
right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Um, so I guess my first like general question to ask is, so how did you find your way to this particular story, like to telling this particular story? Like, what inspired you to write, to write Phantoms?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the sub question of that, I think, is why do we need a white man writing about Asian and Asian American people? And I think we don't. But I'll get to that. I grew up in effectively in the town that the book takes place in, not in Newcastle, but in Auburn, which is the county seat, which is right next to Newcastle. And growing up, we had probably a sentence or two in the history books about the Japanese internment in California, um, in which basically every single citizen or immigrant of Japanese descent was taken to prison camps. Not only in California, but also, I mean, the entire Pacific coast, but they were shipped as far as Arkansas. And I do mean shipped, like loaded into trains and shipped there. Um, and in my upbringing in Placer County, apart from that brief mention, there was very little or no discussion about that historical reality. And I think growing up, it didn't even really occur to me that that history had occurred in my little town, in the sense of like grammar school history being
Uh-oh.
really that close to us. in some ways, right? And this is sort of this is a very
Uh-oh. Well, it looks like we have some technical difficulties here. Hold on. Hopefully Christian will reconnect soon.
Here I am.
Oh,
Here I am.
you're back?
Can
There
you
you
hear
go.
me? Can you
Okay,
hear me?
yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Okay.
Well,
So
I don't know what.
you're talking about the about not really realizing that, not really being exposed to that history.
Yeah, and I think part of the exposure to history is the way history is presented or was presented in the 70s when I was in grammar school, which is just sort of a very white, patriarchal kind of structured history about things that happen to other people.
Right.
So there's this sort of fundamental othering in the way we talk about um, our history and even what our history constitutes. And I'm speaking specifically about the history that I learned in Placer County, sort of rural Northern California. Um, I had one classmate whose parents had been in the Tule Lake camp. She was necessarily the representative of everything that had to do with any kind of history with Japan or Japanese Japanese American citizens, or Asianness in general. And it occurred to me much, much later to kind of dig a little bit into that history and just to find out what exactly had actually happened here, and was immediately floored by the understanding that before World War II, my county was roughly 50% Japanese and Chinese citizens, immigrants and or citizens, and that after World War II, most of those citizens did not return to Placer County, but went to places like San Francisco and San Jose, which had vibrant, welcoming Japan and Chinatowns. And sort of understanding what happened, why it happened, and and how to talk about the place that I grew up in, and about people who should have been my neighbors growing up, but also finding a way to the story that would be from a perspective of whiteness, which I felt was the only perspective I could really write about. The structure of the book, having that kind of MacGuffin chapter in the first chapter, which is a story, and then there's a jump cut. Well, the first chapter was my attempt to write the book at first.
Got it.
And I wrote that chapter and went like, well, I can't, like, who am I to write? I mean, there's no amount of research I could do that would give me the hubris to write that closely to Ray Takahashi. So I had to figure out a way to tell the story askance. And that's essentially where the book came from. It's like my it's Marshall Mathers, Slim Shady, and Eminem. It's all like, it's like me trying to figure out like how far back. So, you've got a Vietnam vet talking about an event that happened in the past, before he was born, or soon after he was born. And, he's not involved in that story, and yet he becomes involved in that story. And then I think, what I'm trying to do at the end is sort of an acknowledgement that, Viet Thanh Nguyen sort of talks about like white people succeed even when they fail. So it's like he's not even involved in the story, and he ends up with the birthright of the Takahashis, and he's not even in it. But it's and he just sort of like goes like, well, I'm kind of depressed, but like, boy, it's a nice night, and that's sort of like the end. So all of those webs kind of interwoven or were interwoven in a way that I hope allowed me to tell a story that in some ways I have no business telling. You
Okay,
know,
so because you sort of because you begin are like talking about I guess needing to find that particular narrator, right, in order to find your way to telling the story that you wanted to tell. I'm gonna fast forward to my writer questions, because
nerd questions.
yeah,
Woo, nerd questions.
because this is one of the things that I think that I love so much about the book, and that fascinates me so much about the book, and that feels very right, about the way
E-
that you tell the story, right? So
Every time you say you love my book, I literally am about to burst into tears. I can't even. I can't even. I'm verklempt.
I do, I love it.
Oh my
It's
god! Oh my god! You did it again.
okay, I'll stop. It's okay. Let's see. One of the aspects that I really appreciated the most was that the was your use of that plural first person, or that we, right? When the
Yeah.
narrator, the Vietnam vet, is telling the story, right? Especially I think around the sections, um, about around the internment, right, of the Japanese families in the county, and that we comes up a lot, right? And then even in that first, I want to say in that
Mm-hmm.
first section, that first chapter, that
Mm-hmm.
is so closely aligned with Ray. I feel like the we, is present in that part too, right? So let's see. You already spoke a little bit, because my question was like, how did you find that character? How did you find that the Vietnam vet who told the story? And then how did you come to that decision to have that narrator, or that embrace the we, right, of like white
Yeah.
America in his retelling, um of the story, because that character could have been any other character. I mean, the character didn't necessarily, right, have to be a Vietnam vet. It could have been, he could have just, I don't know, he could have been a hippie, or he could have been
Yeah.
a hippie that he saw in San Francisco when he woke up from his bender, right? He could have been anyone,
Yeah.
right? But instead,
Yeah.
he's basically this person who at least has enough self-awareness, right, to embrace that we, and to write from that we perspective. So I'm just curious about
Yeah.
how exactly you found him.
I think part of it was Faulkner's story, A Rose for Emily,
Yes.
and also the first few sentences of Flaubert's Madame Bovary, that's sort of like classic we perspective.
Mhm.
But also it's like I can't I guess when I started really thinking hard about writing a book about America in this way, that question of like, who is America? Who is America, and who is asking the question, who is America?
Right.
I mean, your America, Jesmyn, and my America are just going to be different,
Right.
in terms of gender and race and ethnicity and culture, and Mississippi and California, and it's so who is asking what we means is important. Um, it affects the experiment.
Mhm.
It affects the experiment. And I do think that my narrator John Fraser is probably too self-aware for
Hmm.
the time that he's writing in,
Right.
because I sort of picture him as kind of a Richard Ford
Mhm.
sort of a figure, like he's writing sort of like straight realist,
Right.
like cisgendered American male white fiction, which I really like. I've read all that stuff, and I love it. I
Mhm.
really do. In terms of tone and voice and all of that stuff. And I was really interested in like that person as a character, not Richard, but that the sort of like traditional white, sort of like American traditional white male sort of patriarch novelist, kind of coming to terms with what has been white America's treatment of and understanding of Asia, Asianness, and Asian Americans as sort of other than,
Right.
and how our long relationship with that kind of thinking have they led to our treatment of Japan during World War II, Korea, Vietnam. Now we've sort of like shifted a little bit to the Middle East, but then the tracing COVID back to China and all the sort of like anti-Asian rhetoric that suddenly sprang up again. That kind of othering is so embedded into into a certain kind of American consciousness that it's pervasive, and it makes it difficult to see through to any other kind of America for lots and lots of people, many of whom live in my little town up in the Sierra Nevada foothills and are still flying their Trump flags and their
Right.
and their Let's Go Brandon flags and all that stuff. I mean, I'm right in the heart of the terror show.
Right. Right. In that way, our Americas are like very like so. No, I think that that's one of the reasons for me that the story works so well, and that the book works so well. Like, even though like you said, that you think he's a little bit too self-aware, right, for who he was at the time. I don't know. That there's something. I think it has for a reader like me that I think it I don't know, it helps me to feel more empathy as a reader for like everyone involved. I think just having those moments where that narrator is able to embrace that the we voice and be more self-aware. I don't know. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to the to the easier question. So I'm really interested in this. So how long did you spend researching before you began working on the rough draft? Or did you spend a long time researching before you began writing the rough draft, or did you just begin the rough draft and then sort of write as you researched? Or
Yeah, I kind of do the classic thing where I do research as a way to not have to start writing the book for probably way a long time. It's like,
right.
oh, I have to go look at this brick like three towns over first, otherwise I just can't write,
Right.
So yeah, I mean, it was down to like, so the old Japantown part of Newcastle is gone. The freeway replaced it, which I think I do say in the book at some point. Yep. But trying to find the it's my buddy, trying to find the like maps of that area of town, like what the layout was, what the streets were, what shop was on what street, which is the kind of thing writers do, which is also so stupid. Right. Because like nobody cares, man. Right. But right. You do have to somehow internalize the geography in the same way you have to internalize the hearts and the souls of those characters. So for me, it's like, it's a little like where you're learning a foreign language, learning a language that's not your own. That's a terrible way to put it too. Learning some other language. Mm-hmm. And they say, you don't really know it until you can dream in that language. Right. I kind of feel like that's what the research is. Like, you're giving yourself all the materials so you can dream in that language.
Oh, that's such a good way to think about it. I think that's totally, that
right?
feels very true to me. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I researched, I read all these old newspapers and got copies of the Placer High School yearbooks from before and after the war. Um, Talked to somebody who grew up in Newcastle's Japantown, who like drew me a map on a scrap of paper so I could get a sense of what it looked like. Oh, and then I read everything on Vietnam that I could. It's funny, the internment situation, that generation of Japanese and Japanese American citizens were very reticent to talk about that experience in any significant way. So there's very few first person accounts of internment life, especially if you're trying to dial into like, what was it like at Tule Lake during this period?
Right.
It's fairly difficult to find first-hand accounts in the way that you can find first-hand accounts of other kinds of concentration camps and prison camps, right? So that was pretty challenging. I did finally find kind of a storehouse of oral histories that people had typed up, so that allowed me to kind of get into it. I talked to Shigyo Kota, who was I went to his 100th birthday party, and he was in the same military unit that Ray was in World War II. And again, this is like, part of it was research, and part of it was wondering if anyone was going to tell me, don't write this book. This is not your story. Right. Like, this is not for you. Everybody I spoke to, including people who were born at Tule Lake, were very excited that anyone was even interested in it. And so then the trick then became being true to that and to honor that, what I felt like was maybe an implicit trust that was given to me just by dint of nobody saying like, hell no, I don't know you. Like, this is not your story.
Right.
And being true to that and trying to write about it in a way that was true to my experience of that experience.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Otherwise you write American dirt.
Right.
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 Yeah.
And that's the danger. That's the thing that you want to avoid. I never really read once every blue moon I'll read the acknowledgments at the end of a novel, but mostly I don't. But with yours, I actually sat there last night and like read your acknowledgments because I think, I don't know, I was like, I think really impressed because I feel like one of the things that you conveyed in your acknowledgments was the fact that was part of your process, and that you were really thinking about what it meant to write about a community, and that you are not a part of, and write about an experience, right? About a group of people that you're not a part of. And so I don't know, I think I appreciated that, because I feel like I don't think that we see that enough, perhaps, in the industry, like instead, like you're saying, like we get American dirt, right? And there's a lot of like obfuscation. Am I saying that word correctly? And
you are now,
like smoke and mirrors, and people are sort of like deflecting the question, and not wanting to answer it, and saying things like, I'm a writer, I should be able to write about anything that I want. I mean, people have debated this. It's been debated. But I think
it's Matt Salas who says, like, if you're a person of color in America, you live in the dominant culture and the minority culture at the same time. And if you're a white person in America, you live in the dominant culture, and then you research whatever culture is you're interested in. But there's just so much hubris in that feeling that you can Scarlett Johansson your way into any situation you want,
Right.
And like, we're writers, we could make stuff up, but also, like, have some, you know, I'm trying not to swear, have some humility and like
Right,
understand like your whiteness is not like a magical key, man.
right,
It's
right,
the opposite. It's a
right,
bunch of blinders you have on yourself, because everything in our culture supports me having this limited vision. So it's
right.
like, man, it actually kind of makes me mad. It makes me more than mad. It makes me really mad.
And I mean, I guess I just want to communicate how much I appreciated that kind of that like the presence of that sort of thoughtfulness in the book, in the narrative, right, in the way that you wrote it into the narrative, as well as in the way that you talk about the book and the way, you know, that you included in your acknowledgments. Like that, to me, that communicates a real sense, I think, of respect and
Hmm.
the responsibility, I think, that you, a sense of responsibility that you felt, and a sense of like honoring the people that you write about, that you felt when you were writing this. And I think
Yeah.
that that's really key, I think, when you are writing outside of your experience. Uh so
Thank you.
I
That
don't know.
was the
Yeah,
purpose. Yeah, that was
yeah,
the purpose.
and it's very evident, I think, in the text, and outside of the text. Let me ask you another easy question, because so I feel like I'm not taking this easy on you. Oh, I just wonder, because I'm working on a novel that is set in and around New Orleans, around 1835, and it follows an enslaved a woman who is enslaved, right? So it follows her through this experience of being sold south to the slave markets of New Orleans, and then being sold in New Orleans, and then working on a sugarcane plantation. And so one of the things I did a lot, I'm still doing research for this thing, and have done a lot of research for it, because I knew nothing about, American slavery beforehand. Uh, and so one of the interesting things that I feel like has occurred since I have done that research it is that knowing what I know now, what I've learned, makes me it totally changes my experience of place. So now when I go into New Orleans, right? So my experience of the place is just, it's very different, because I'm very aware of the different ways that, like, that particular history of that place has been erased. Um uh and I don't know, and just sort of, yeah, I'm just very aware of how that history has been erased, right?
Yeah.
But how in some ways it's like it is very uh, that history is evident in, say, highway names and boulevard names and street names and development, and Confederate monuments, and all of the rest, right? So it's been memorialized in some ways and erased. Some aspects of it have been memorialized. Some aspects of it have been erased. And so just knowing these things, knowing this history, has changed I guess my awareness when I'm in my hometown, when I'm in New Orleans, when I'm in
Yeah.
surrounding places. So I just wonder if perhaps, like, how your experience of being in your hometown, or being, in that county, like, has that changed with the writing of Phantoms? Has it changed your experience of being in that place? Like, are you more aware of?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So there's the railroad that runs through Auburn, Newcastle, Penryn, and Loomis, which are sort of like, that's the central kind of fruit growing, or was the central fruit growing corridor. There's fruit sheds that run alongside of those tracks, and now they've been converted into antique stores and sandwich shops and all that stuff. But those buildings and the Victorian homes directly around the tracks are kind of the last remnant of that history, because after World War II, it was sort of an economic or capitalist convenience that um, that the internment happened for the white farmers there because the fruit industry was kind of falling apart at the time anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So suddenly the farmers were like, boy, wouldn't it be great if we had like this farm and the next farm and the next farm? And then like, lo and behold, here's a way to do that.
Got it.
So the fruit industry represented in the book, where there's just rolling hills with orchards, like that's effectively all gone. So those hills are houses and oak forests now. So it's part of it is trying to remember and acknowledge the people who should still be there building their lives alongside their white neighbors, and also the kind of geographic or agricultural footprint that was there in that place, which is gone with the people. It's like that area was so monumentally changed between like 1942 and about 1965, when the last of the peach and pear trees died. It's kind of unrecognizable. So in fact, the history there now is the history of the gold rush, because the gold rush effectively started in that town too. So all the monuments are about the gold rush. There's like a big gold panner by the side of the road. Come visit Old Town Auburn, the seat of the gold rush. There's a small Joss house in Old Town Auburn, which is the last standing structure in what used to be the vibrant Chinatown part of Auburn. There's also a neglected Chinese cemetery, which is like, every once in a while somebody comes and like does the weed whacker on it, because otherwise it's just a field, Right. And in terms of the Japanese American population, there's virtually nothing at all. It's a bit like going to Europe and realizing that if it weren't for the Jewish citizens of Germany and Poland and elsewhere, you would have no record of the Nazi atrocities at all. There is an organization called the JACL, the Japanese American Citizens League, of which I'm a member, who has worked to put a monument at the courthouse for the military unit, the Japanese American military unit that Ray Takahashi is a member of. But there's very little there that speaks to that history or draws attention to it that any sort of casual tourist coming off the freeway would recognize or know. Like it's a shameful thing, and like a lot of shameful things in America, white people just would prefer to not talk about it and move along. Right.
Right.
We suck. That's what I should have named my book. We suck.
No, I like Phantoms a lot better. No, but thank you. That's a really that's a really thoughtful question that it makes me think about, like in New Orleans, that was like the center of the domestic slave trade once they outlawed the transportation of slaves, over the Atlantic, right, by ship. And then and so New Orleans became like the center of the American, like the domestic slave trade. And there were, dozens of slave slave traders and slave pens, right? That's what they call them, where slaves were, bought to, marched south, basically, because they're all being sold south, from the upper South to like the lower South. And so, there are dozens of these places all around the city of New Orleans. And then when I first got the idea to work on the book that I worked on, one of the reasons that I got the idea to work on it is because I heard a radio show about it and found out that there were only 2 plaques at that time. This was like was, I don't know, 6 years ago maybe, but there were only two plaques at that time in the city that were marking where there were slave
Right.
pens.
Right.
One of those was in the wrong location, right? So
Yeah.
like it's
And the other
funny,
one's probably in front of a Chipotle now or
right?
something, right?
Right,
Yeah. Right.
right. I mean, it's interesting to hear you, sort of like talk about your experience and how that sort of erasure has manifested itself, in you know it, in your place, right? And
Yeah.
how it sort of uh mirrors, right? Like that, mirrors that experience too. So it's just interesting to me.
That's
So
why
let me,
nobody should write books, because it just ruins all your favorite places. It's like everything is just like, oh, this is where the darkness happened. This is the
right,
other place the darkness happened. It's like,
right,
yeah,
right, yeah, can't enjoy the French Quarter anymore,
I
right?
know, right?
Um, let's see. I'm
Now I got to
trying,
feel guilty about eating my Chipotle because there's a plaque out here. You
right.
know,
We're human beings, were right.
yeah.
So terrible. Um, Let me try to find some of the readers' questions we've because I've been asking all my nerd questions. And let's see.
Nerd.
uh,
How many people are on this call?
I don't
Okay,
know
we don't know.
actually. Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't. I can't find it on my screen.
Okay.
But I think that it's like available for the
Yeah.
members of the club to watch, even if they, at any time that they want.
Yeah.
So,
And people are welcome. People on this or listening to it are welcome to send me a message on Twitter or Instagram if they got more questions. I'm happy to do that
that's
for sure.
fantastic. That's a
Yeah.
great offer because there are
You
a
can,
lot.
y'all can find me.
Okay, good. Look, they have a lot of questions. Let's see. Mm, this is a really interesting question. So one reader, her handle is Cindy G, says this book says so much about storytelling and the power of exploring one's own experiences, those too painful to look at or address head on, by telling the story of another's. And then she says, I would love to hear how storytelling has played that role in Christian's own life and writing, and Jesmyn's as well.
Holy
Um,
cow.
yeah,
Just
that's
come out swinging, man.
right.
Cindy G, Cindy OG, more like. Um, um, wow. I don't know how to answer that in a personal way. I do think human beings are kind of narrative making machines, or rather, we're organizational machines. I think we like to take the stuff in life that seems abstract and try to make sense of it.
Mhm.
Um, I took when my oldest son was maybe 6 or something, I took him to the museum to see the Francis Bacon traveling exhibit. And taking a child to see Francis Bacon paintings was probably a terrible idea. But he came up with a whole narrative of what was happening in the paintings as if they were sequential and told a story. So he
Oh
was like
wow.
leading me through the story of Francis Bacon and the time and then a monster came and they wrestled, and I'm like, well, they're having sex, but okay. And but I think like sort of fundamentally we tell stories about everything, including ourselves. And part of I spend a lot of my energy just trying to be a good person,
Right.
to my friends and my family and the people I care about and people I don't even know. And I think part of that is understanding that the narrative you tell yourself about yourself is probably bullshit,
Right.
and you have to treat that narrative um, not as a lie, but certainly as something that is um, pliable,
Mhm.
or plastic, something that can change and probably should change all the time. And it's not to say that like your self-awareness is lesser than somebody else's awareness of you, but it's to say that your ability to move through the world and understand who you are and what you're doing is, I think, attached to a long, impossibly long bunch of baggage that is your story that you're dragging behind you all the time. And that story and how you think about that story and how you think about yourself as the hero of your own story is probably flawed. And, you know, writing a book like Phantoms is a way to come at that in a very sideways direction. Had I been a braver person, I probably would have, I'd probably write a memoir or something, but I just don't have that kind of bravery. If I did write a memoir, though, it would be told in the third person by somebody else who knew somebody who once talked to me,
Right.
because that's just sort of how I think about narrative. It's like,
Right.
it's gotta be kind of obfuscated by, since we're gonna use obfuscate again, Jesmyn. It's got to be obfuscated by some kind of self-awareness that you're lying to yourself, or you're trying to tell yourself the truth, but it's probably, it's probably only partially true. What about you in narrative?
I I don't know. It's funny, like, to hear you say that about the third person, right? That for you, like, narrative is something that where you often approach it from this viewpoint where you want to obfuscate, right? The this not the story necessarily, but like the chain of
Yeah,
the way that people
the
know.
received truths, maybe, or
Right,
something, right?
right.
Yeah.
And whereas I realized that, like, my first novel was really the only one that I wrote from third person point of view. And for me, that was uncomfortable because it demanded, like, writing from that, it made me very aware of the fact that I was making all the choices, right? And
Yeah.
so then I began sort of playing around with first person point of view, and there's something about writing from that point of view that I am very comfortable with, and I think in part it's because I feel obliterated in some respect when I'm writing from the first person point of view, because it
Mhm.
feels like I'm just sort of inhabiting someone else's experience and channeling their experience onto the page. Um, and that is more comfortable for me, I guess, because I'm able
Yeah,
to
that sounds terrifying to me.
forget myself. So it's interesting, right? That we're like so different um
Yeah.
in our sort of approaches to narrative. And I did write I have written a memoir. And it was one of the hardest things that I've ever done, and I'd never want to do it again. And I don't know. I mean, I think, because the focus of that memoir, it wasn't just my story. A lot it sort of, at the same time that I was telling my story, I guess, I was also trying to tell something of my brother's life, my cousin's life, my friends' lives who had died within that 5-year period that I'm writing about in the book. So I think so again, I feel like even in that story, it wasn't solely sort of centered in my experience, right? And in my uh, understanding of, I don't know, like, yeah, it wasn't totally centered in my experience. But even so, even though it's not a sort of traditional memoir, it was still one of the hardest things that it was the hardest thing I've ever written, and is one of the reasons that I don't want to attempt to write another one. Not for
We
the
should
for
write a joint memoir. You write the part about me, and I'll write the part
right,
about you.
right,
We'll
right,
both be first person. It'll be really weird.
right. So let me sort of begin to wrap up with an easier question that one of the readers had. Reposed Angle, I think, asked if there are any books that you'd recommend, and I think yeah, just asked if there are any books that you would recommend. Um,
So many.
yeah, but this reader, I think, is specifically asking about books that you feel should have a bigger audience. Maybe that, perhaps books that.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I really love this lady Jesmyn Ward's books. She's so fucking good. I mean, every sentence is just filled with music,
Oh
and
no!
she just breaks my heart every time. I've read every scrap she's ever written, and she's pretty good and not very well known. She hasn't won any awards or anything. Nobody's heard of her.
No.
I do really love Lauren Groff.
Oh yeah.
I think Lauren's prose is exciting, very interesting. I like Garth Greenwell a lot. And I really, the book I read most recently that I really enjoyed was How High We Go in the Dark, Sequoia Nagamatsu's science fiction novel. I'm always really excited by books that I for sure could not have written. And that book, like from the very first page, I was like, oh, this is way out of anything I would ever try to do. And it's it's a book that covers like 6,000 years or something like that. It goes way, way, way into the future. And it's about love and death and heartbreak and plagues and what it is to be human and all the important stuff. I'm really interested in prose that is non-transparent. So like I want a certain ornateness and I want there to be a style that's apparent. I don't really care to forget that I'm reading. I'm not somebody who wants to feel like the story is just inhabiting me in some effortless way. Like I really do love like Baldwin for that, and Toni Morrison, and I like C.E. Morgan. I liked Raven Leilani's book, Luster. And I'm thinking of like writers who are clearly doing something, who aren't just trying to tell you a story with some characters, but who are also really working with the sentences in a way. I mean, I like you, I think I grew up on Faulkner. And so like my gold standard is like that first 2 pages of Absalom, and it always will be. Like I'm always trying to reach that benchmark, which is impossible. And Faulkner has, there's lots of problems with Faulkner. And I think there's even problems with Faulkner's prose sometimes. I think he occasionally gets so boozed out that he gets entangled in his own sentences. And, sometimes like you're reading it, you're just going like, oh, come on, man. Like, come on, Can't you just have a cup of coffee without going on and on and on about it? But I think, but there is like, I mean, he is doing something that was for the time very bold and very interesting, and stylistically still really interests me. It's like a maximalism of writing. And I think given his time, he was writing about some pretty hard things to write about for a white guy from Mississippi. So that's what I'm interested in, like an ornateness of style or an attention to style in a way that like reminds me of somebody like Melville or Hawthorne or like Virginia Woolf, or I like Styron's writing a lot. These are just writers who are kind of all in Richard Ford once told me he thought I was word besotted, and I was like, and he, I mean, I think he meant it as a subtle criticism, but I was like, thank you, Richard.
Right.
Like that is what I'm after.
Right. Right.
Like, why learn all these words if I'm not going to use them?
Right. Right. I love it. I love it. Because I feel like that was my experience too when I was first, trying to like read as a writer and write and enrolling in workshops, and that was the critique, right? Like, oh, your prose is just too much. And then I don't know. I feel like I decided to lean in, because that is what
Yeah.
I'd always been. That was the reason that I felt like I fell in love with reading, right, as a child, not just for, not just to be transported, but because of the magic that the language itself could work.
Yeah.
So
I mean, it's all artifice, right? I mean, language itself is
right.
artifice. So it's like, why not go full artifice?
Right.
Why not just like lean in? Like, if you're gonna write, like, I don't know, get in your drag racer and let's do that.
Right.
You know?
Right. Right. Right.
Plus, there's like a slowness to a certain kind of prose. Like, you can't like blaze through that the first few pages of Sing Unburied Sing where he's like killing that. It's a hog, right? They're killing.
I think it's a. Is it a hog?
goat?
I think it's a goat.
It's a goat. It's a goat. Yeah. I mean, you can't speed read that. Like, you just, the language
Right.
is such that you have to sort of deal with it. And
Right.
I mean, by the end, like, I mean, it's only like a few pages, but like you need to take a bath afterwards, but like in like the best way.
Right.
And I like to do things slow. Like, oftentimes, I'm in really good shape right now, in part because I decided I was walking too fast, so I started to put rocks in my backpack and wear that because I wanted to slow down. And so then it became like I was carrying 70 pounds on my back, and it was agonizing. And I thought, well, I should just go climb mountains now, which is what I'm doing. But it's just like, let's not get faster, let's get slower.
Right.
And that's part of what that kind of prose does for me. It's like you read a page and you're exhausted, and you have to sit and sort of deal with it. Like, wow, that was a lot of language.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Love it.
Who do you like?
What am I? You said what? Oh,
see, that's a hard question, right?
It is a hard question, right? It's one of those like deceptive questions where you think it's easy, it's actually difficult.
Yeah.
I really like a lot of the stuff that we've been reading. I mean, I guess that's the reason I chose it. But I like a lot of the stuff that we've been reading in
your own book club.
Yeah, I mean, I do. I love.
I love that answer.
Well,
have you heard of this book club that I have? Because I love all the books in that.
Great. Oh, well, we haven't read Longroff, and I do. I love Longroff's work. I teach Longroff, at Tulane. I love Florida. I haven't read her new book, The Matrix.
It's astounding.
It is.
It is astounding. Yes, it's astounding. You have to. It's just really like, I can't believe a human being wrote it.
Really?
She's not a human being. That's what I found out. Yeah.
There are moments I feel that way with in Florida too, which is the short story collection for.
Oh yeah.
Don't know. I mean, some of those stories, they're amazing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really like her. We read last in December. The December book that we read, which I'm, I know how to pick them because we read Heartberries by Teresa.
Oh gosh, Maya. Yeah.
Right. So
Teresa
like,
Maya,
right? It's not a Christmas book, right? But I'm like, yeah, let's read this for Christmas. But I noticed that about her prose too, right? I mean,
absolutely.
She's writing creative nonfiction, but still, like
she's all in on the language. Yeah.
Right.
That book is astounding, and also and this is going to go on Facebook forever, but I hate the title of that book. I
Really?
wish it had. Yeah, I wish it had. It actually made me not want to read it for a really long time.
Huh.
I was like, heartberries. I don't want to read heartberries. It sounds like just I don't know. It just doesn't sound serious. It doesn't have any
Yeah.
gravitas.
Right. Right.
You know,
Right. Right. I can see that.
heartberries of the darkness from hell. Like that's what I want. You know,
I
I
can
want my
see.
titles. I want my titles to
I can
potentially
see
be
that.
on the cover of a Scandinavian death metal album. Sing, unburied, sing. Rah! You know, you can't go like heartberries. Like that's
Right.
like what? It doesn't work.
Right. Well, let me ask you about titles really quickly before because I'm gonna ask you about titles, and then I'm
Yeah.
gonna ask you to tell me what your work just if you want to speak a
Okay.
little bit about what you're working on
Okay.
now, and then we'll wrap up. But I'll
Good.
ask you about titles because when I write titles, just to give you some context, I stumbled on the title of my first novel was like very long, right?
Yeah.
I, lyrical, but I don't know how much. I mean, I was in my 20s when I wrote my first novel, right? I didn't know what I was doing. I was just figuring it out as I went along. And then with Salvage the Bones, right? Death metal title. It's
Salvage the bones.
it's like a directive, right? It's like
Yeah.
I'm
Do
it's
this.
sort of an
Yeah.
order, right? And so that's actually something that I have tried to do with my other novels, right? Like when I was trying to come up with the title for Sing Unburied Sing, I was like, I want another like
Directive.
title. You're right. That's like telling someone that's like an action title that's telling someone to do something.
Yeah. Very
I ha-
metal.
right. I haven't worked my way yet to a one word title like with Phantoms.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess I want to know how you think about titles and
Well,
if
first of all, you are, and I've actually said this aloud several times. You are the best titler of books of all time because your titles just destroy. Um, Phantoms is not a great title, but it is a great title for this book
right,
because of the several layers of meanings.
right,
Titles are often pretty hard for me, and my titles are all kind of dumb. Um, something when I tell you, like my drafts always have like, I mean, my placeholder title is Goose Attack with an exclamation point for everything I write. Nonfiction, fiction, short stories, poems, novels. It'll be like Goose Attack on the front page because that's what I use. Goose Attack.
I love it.
Um, so I'm working on a novel right now called Goose Attack, and it's like my fifth or sixth time trying to write this novel.
Oh my
It's
goodness.
about it's about it's about geese for a change. No, the new one is about mountaineering, which I'm doing a lot of.
Right.
So a danger on peaks. It's about a kind of a family who is sort of a family story, but I think it's going to be quite short. Under 300, 200,000 words, maybe something
Right.
like that.
Right.
I hope. I will say every time I write a novel, I'm trying to write a novella and then it gets out of control.
Right.
Because I always think like, oh, this time I'm just going to get to the point, and then I realize like I'm 3 pages in, I'm not even reached the first period of the sentence yet, because I'm a lunatic. So yeah, I'm trying to. Well, I try as we've talked about. I tried to write a science fiction novel, and I'm still sort of tapping away at that. But the difference is, it took me, I don't know, a year to write 50 pages of the science fiction novel, and I got 25 pages of the mountaineering thing done in like 3 days, just because that's something I really know about. I don't know what it's like to live on a swamp planet with a bunch of sentient mushrooms, which is
Right.
what the other book is about, But I sure do know what it's like to be teetering on a ridge in a blowing wind,
Right.
shivering with cold and wondering if you're going to make it out alive. Like that I've done many times, you know.
Right.
So I don't know, you know, it's always interesting to me how people can occupy an imaginative space where they have to create the entire world.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, I feel like as novelists, we're creating a world, but you know, you can just say they got in the car. You don't have to spend
Right.
a bunch of time describing the
Right.
Zutenfly in which they're now riding in to get to the Florgenbjorgen. Suddenly we're at like IKEA, right?
Right.
Everything is a Fjorgenblorgen.
Right. Right. Very different.
I mean,
Right.
I mean, like our like my job and your job, I think, is to break the reader's heart so that they can reassemble it in a way that's new or stronger or better. And
Uh-oh. We'll come back. I hope. No. Maybe. But I do agree with Christian. I think that is our job, right? As writer. But one of our jobs as writers, right? Is to break the reader's heart. And then hopefully, you know, like at the end of the book, at the end of the experience, that heart has been reconstructed. And perhaps it will, you know, like change the way that the reader experiences the world or sees the world outside of the book. So that was a great point, I think, to end on, even if he doesn't pop back in. Let's see. He's still here. It's just not here. Okay, he's coming in a moment. But I will just say that y'all asked really great questions in the discussion about, you know, like about phantoms. And I was like pleasantly, I don't know, like felt like I did a good job this month with the pick because really like the response to this book was like overwhelmingly positive. So that made me feel good because you know, I mean, I want to um you know, expose y'all to like different books and different writers that you may not have necessarily had the time or you know, been exposed to, right? um so I want to do that, but at the same time too, like I want you to actually enjoy the experience of reading the books that I pick. So like it was nice to sort of like look at the discussions that have been posted so far and see see that people were actually enjoyed enjoyed the work. But I love phantoms, and yeah, I hope that Christian comes back because I want to tell him like how excited I am to read his new work, and whether that's the sci-fi book whenever it is completed or the book about mountaineering. You know, I follow him on Instagram, and so that's one of the reasons I sort of knew that he had been climbing mountains. He'd been on lots of mountains because he posts about his adventures on Instagram, which is amazing. And I would never have the guts to, I don't know, to try to haul myself up a mountain. But he has been doing a lot of it. So I can imagine that would like translate in really interesting vivid, immediate ways in his work, as he's like, writing this novel about it. So I'm excited. I can't wait to read it. I love his prose. Uh-oh. Okay. Well, I guess we're having trouble with getting him back. We have been here for an hour, which is the amount of time that I sort of ask people to commit to this kind of thing. But he is on Instagram, Christian Kiefer. He is on Twitter. I don't know what his handle on Twitter is. But if you just search his name, and he wants people to, to reach out to him, because I know I wasn't able to get to all the questions that y'all asked in the discussion threads. But definitely reach out to him. He's a great person, great writer, great human being. So definitely, reach out to him, follow him. I'm glad. I'm really happy that we were able to have this, this discussion. I guess that is it, because it doesn't look like we're going to be able to get him back. But yeah, reach out to him if you want to continue the conversation. He's fantastic. And I guess I will see you in the discussion threads on the Literati app. So thank y'all for tuning in. And, it's always a pleasure. I have so much fun, talking to people who I admire and whose work I admire. So I'm just really, glad that I get the opportunity to do this for you. So thank y'all.